Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Great.
All right.
Today, we're going to be looking at the word made flesh.
Ah, Lillian DeWaters.
Yeah, published back in 1930. It's interesting. This piece isn't really like your typical theological,
Right.
heavy, dense kind of writing.
No.
It's really about DeWaters takes this core concept from the Gospel of John
Okay.
and gives us a guide for like practical spiritual living.
Yeah. She really emphasizes that practicality, doesn't she?
Yeah.
That this idea that we can take these profound truths
Right.
about our being and actually apply them to our health and well-being.
Yeah. So how about you tell us more about that, like what she means by making the truth of being practical? What does that look like to her?
Well, she talks about how this era, back in the 30s when she was writing, is really all about this making that truth of being
Yeah.
applicable to our daily lives,
Yeah.
meeting our everyday needs through a deeper understanding of our true nature.
So let's break that down a little bit. Like when we talk about this idea of the word made flesh, it can kind of get lost in the abstract, right?
Yeah.
So how can we think about this in a way that's really relevant to our lives?
I think for DeWaters, it's about seeing those divine principles.
Okay.
The truth about our spiritual nature become tangible experiences,
Yeah.
like bridging that gap between the spiritual and the material.
Okay, so it's not just about passively believing these things, it's about actively living and experiencing them.
Exactly. And I think that's really key to how she approaches healing as well. She talks about this concept of absolute science,
Okay.
which, can sound a little intimidating at first.
It does. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. But it's really about recognizing that power of our consciousness
Okay.
to shape our reality.
So this seems like it might be different from like that typical mind over matter kind of approach we hear about a lot. How is what DeWaters is talking about different?
Yeah, you're right to pick up on that distinction.
Yeah.
She's very careful to kind of differentiate between the absolute science that she's talking about
Right.
and those popular notions of, mind over matter where you're kind of,
Like forcing things.
yeah, just through brute force trying to manipulate external conditions.
Yeah.
For her, it's more about demonstrating soul's control over our senses and really aligning our beliefs with a higher understanding, which she calls science.
So it sounds like she's really highlighting this shift in consciousness,
Absolutely.
like a way of seeing ourselves and the world in a completely new light.
Yeah, and she uses this really brilliant analogy. She compares stumbling upon healing unconsciously to finding a light switch in a dark room purely by chance.
Oh, I like that.
We might experience those moments of healing, but the goal is to gain conscious control over that power. We're looking for that switch that consistently activates that capacity for well-being.
Right. So how do we find that switch? How do we actually tap into that healing power within us?
Well, she offers a roadmap, really, a 3-step process for applying that spiritual understanding to our everyday lives. It's a practical guide to making those abstract truths tangible.
Okay, this is what we want, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. So what's step one on this path?
Step one is, and it's really the foundation for everything else, is apprehending your true being. It's about understanding and recognizing your inherent spiritual perfection.
So not striving to become perfect, but realizing that perfection that already exists.
Exactly. And from that understanding, we can move to the second step, which is really about addressing all those ways we've kind of, veered away from that inherent perfection.
Through our limiting beliefs.
Exactly. She calls for correcting those erroneous beliefs and replacing them with a true understanding of our divine nature.
Okay, so it's like we're upgrading our mental software to match the inherent perfection of our spiritual hardware.
That's a great way to put it.
So what's the third step in this process?
This is where the true transformation begins. She calls this step spiritualizing consciousness. And as our thoughts and senses align with this deeper spiritual understanding, that's when we witness that natural improvement in our physical well-being.
So it's not about forcing change on the body, but allowing those changes to unfold naturally as our consciousness evolves.
Yeah.
Now, this sounds profound, but is it really that simple? Like, can we really just shift our thinking and expect our bodies to follow suit?
Well, she acknowledges that potential pitfall, that we might have all this spiritual knowledge,
Right.
but we're not putting it into practice.
Right. We're not actually doing anything with it.
Exactly. And she uses this kind of striking analogy. She says, imagine having a treasure chest full of gold, but choosing to live in poverty.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah,
So it's not enough to just know these things. We have to actually live them, embody them.
exactly. And she talks about letting the word become substantial in our lives, translating those insights into action, letting them manifest in concrete ways.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we take those abstract spiritual concepts and ground them in our day-to-day reality?
Well, to illustrate this process, she uses this really compelling metaphor. She talks about the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly.
Okay, how does that apply to our journey of spiritual growth?
So you've got the caterpillar, which represents that earthly human experience,
Okay.
and the butterfly, which represents that, that heavenly divine state of being.
Okay.
But the key takeaway is that these aren't separate realities.
Right.
They're different expressions of the same fundamental truth.
Okay.
And she argues that grasping this interconnectedness actually simplifies the process of demonstrating that spiritual understanding in our lives.
So by recognizing that inherent connection between the human and the divine, it becomes easier to integrate those truths into our everyday experiences.
Precisely.
So it's not about denying our human experience, but seeing it through that lens of the divine.
Exactly. And she emphasizes that both understanding, what she calls insight, and demonstration, what she calls practice,
Okay.
are essential components of this journey.
So it's not enough to just intellectually grasp these ideas. We have to put them into action. We have to actually live them out.
Right.
Now, as we embark on this path of spiritual growth and healing, are there any common misconceptions or potential pitfalls we should be aware of?
One of the common misconceptions that she addresses is this tendency to separate the absolute and the relative
Okay.
in metaphysics.
I've heard those terms before, but I'm not always sure I understand how they apply in a practical sense. So what does she mean by absolute versus relative?
It's not about choosing one over the other.
Mhm.
She argues that both perspectives are essential,
Okay.
like different aspects of the same truth, two sides of the same coin.
So it's not about rejecting one in favor of the other, but understanding how they work together.
Exactly. And she warns against that danger of focusing solely on the absolute without addressing the practical needs of human experience.
So we can't just float around in the clouds of abstract concepts. We have to ground those truths in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And she also points out that even those beliefs that might not be the ultimate absolute truth can still serve as valuable stepping stones on our path to higher understanding.
Could you give an example of that? Like, how can a belief that isn't the absolute truth still be beneficial?
Sure. Consider, for example, the belief that God cares for the human body.
Okay.
Even if this isn't the ultimate unchanging truth,
Okay.
it can still elevate our consciousness, and it can open us up to those deeper realizations. It's a step toward a more expansive and empowering worldview.
So it's not about discarding those beliefs as we journey toward a greater understanding. They can actually serve as helpful companions along the way.
Absolutely. They can be valuable stepping stones on our path. Now, another key concept that DeWaters emphasizes is this nature of illusion and its power over our experience.
She talks about illusion quite a bit. So what does she mean by this term, and why is it so important in her view?
She makes this very bold statement about illusion. She says it's entirely mental. It's not some objective force out there in the world,
Okay.
but a misconception, a distortion of perception that originates within our own minds.
So those things that we perceive as problems or limitations or obstacles, they don't have a reality independent of our own thinking.
That's what she's suggesting.
Mm.
And she uses this, really vivid example of the woman who believes her arm is covered in feathers.
Right.
Those feathers aren't objectively real. They're a
No.
projection of her thoughts.
Plus, like, our perception itself is crafting this illusory experience of a problem where none inherently exists.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is that once we perceive the nothingness of that illusion,
Okay.
we're free from it. We're no longer bound by those self-imposed limitations.
It's like that reminder. The only thing to fear is fear itself. It's the fear, the belief, and the reality of the problem that actually creates the experience of suffering.
That's a great connection. And DeWaters takes this concept even further, linking it to our inherent power. She says that we individualize or bring into our experience as much power and glory as we apprehend and realize.
So the more we align with our true divine nature, the more we're able to express those qualities of power and glory, not in an egotistical sense, but as a natural emanation of our true selves.
Precisely. And she's not talking about a power that dominates or controls others, but a power that flows from recognizing our oneness with the divine.
Our inherent connection to that limitless source of good.
Exactly.
So it's like we're tapping into an infinite reservoir of potential within us.
That's the idea. And she emphasizes that this isn't some far-off goal, some future state of enlightenment we have to strive for. It's something we can access right here, right now. It's about aligning ourselves with that truth in this present moment.
I appreciate how she continually brings it back to the present moment.
Yeah.
You know, it really emphasizes that transformation isn't something that just happens to us. It's a conscious choice we make in every moment.
Absolutely. And she reminds us that faith and love are vital to this process. They're not just feel-good emotions, but catalysts, active forces that help us realize our full potential.
So we're actively choosing to align ourselves with those qualities, allowing them to guide our actions and shape our experience.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
And it's about trusting in that divine guidance, that inner wisdom that's always leading us towards wholeness.
Trust is key, but it can be hard to cultivate that trust, especially when we're facing challenges. So how can we hold on to that sense of faith when things feel difficult?
That's a question many of us grapple with, and I think DeWaters would say that it starts with recognizing our inherent perfection, even amidst those challenges.
So holding on to that vision of ourselves as spiritual beings, as expressions of the divine, no matter what our external circumstances might be.
Exactly. And remembering that those challenges, those illusions, however real they may seem, don't have the power to define us.
They are not the ultimate truth of who we are. It's a powerful reminder that we're not victims of circumstance, but creators of our experience.
Precisely. And DeWaters encourages us to find practical, tangible ways to express those spiritual truths in our daily lives, bringing those abstract concepts down to earth, integrating them into our actions and interactions.
So it all comes back to our emphasis on bridging that gap between the spiritual and the material, making those spiritual truths manifest in very concrete ways.
Exactly.
So if we want to start walking this path, what are some specific steps we can take? How do we move beyond intellectual understanding to actually embodying these truths?
So, remember how we were talking about that common misconception
Yeah.
of separating the absolute and the relative? Like, we have to choose one or the other.
Right, right.
DeWaters applies that same principle to how we understand healing.
Okay.
It's not about denying the reality of sickness or forcing it away.
Okay.
With sheer willpower.
So we're not supposed to just pretend we're not sick when we are.
Right. It's more about recognizing that sickness, while it's a real experience,
Yeah.
it doesn't define us, doesn't have ultimate power over us.
That makes sense. But then how do we reconcile that with, the fact that we do experience these things in our human lives, right? Like illness and discomfort and all those things are real.
Yeah, and she suggests that we kind of shift our focus a little bit. Instead of trying to change the external condition, we delve deeper to understand the underlying mental state that might be contributing to it.
Okay.
So she proposes that sickness, at its core is a misconception, an illusion in the mind.
So is this kind of like those feathers on the woman's arm?
Exactly.
Like they weren't actually real. It was just a product of her thinking.
Exactly. And it's important to note here that, she's not suggesting that sickness is a punishment.
Right.
Or something we brought upon ourselves.
Right.
But simply a mistaken belief that needs to be corrected, a misalignment with the truth of our being.
Okay, so this feels much more empowering than, the idea that we're being punished or we've done something wrong. It really puts us back in the driver's seat.
Exactly. And reminds us that we have that power to change our thinking.
Yeah.
To align ourselves with that truth of wholeness that's always present within us.
Okay, so it's about recognizing our inherent wholeness even when we're experiencing symptoms of sickness, right?
Right.
But how do we actually apply that in our lives? Like, what does that look like?
And that's where those stepping stone beliefs that we were talking about earlier come into play.
Okay.
Even if a belief isn't the absolute truth, it can still help us shift our perspective and open up to new possibilities.
Okay.
So, for instance, the belief that God cares for the human body can be a really powerful step towards healing.
So that's much more helpful than believing, say, that, God is indifferent to our suffering, or that our bodies are just, temporary vessels and don't really have any significance.
Exactly. Even if that belief isn't the ultimate truth, it can still create an opening for healing to occur. It's like aligning ourselves with a higher power, a greater good that supports our well-being.
It sounds like she's really emphasizing a gradual unfolding of understanding here. Like,
Yeah.
it's a process, right?
Absolutely.
It's not like an all or nothing approach to healing.
Yeah, she reminds us that the goal isn't to, deny or suppress those seemingly negative aspects of human experience,
Right.
but to see through them,
Yeah.
recognize their illusory nature and ultimately transcend those limitations.
Okay, well, speaking of illusion, she really emphasizes that concept a lot.
She does.
So can you talk more about what she means by illusion and how it relates to healing?
Well, she's very clear in her assertion that illusion is entirely mental.
Okay.
It's not some objective force.
Right. Out there in the world.
Right.
But a misconception.
Yeah, okay.
A distortion of perception that originates within our own minds.
So those things that we perceive as, problems or limitations or obstacles, they don't actually have a reality independent of our thinking. Like, they only exist because we believe them to be true.
That's exactly what she's saying. She uses that example, that vivid example of the woman who believes her arm is covered in feathers.
Right.
The feathers aren't objectively real.
Right.
They're a projection of her thoughts.
So it's like our perception is crafting this illusory experience of a problem where none actually inherently exists.
Exactly. And she emphasizes that once we perceive the nothingness of that illusion, we're free from it. We're no longer bound by those self-imposed limitations.
We realize that the power was within us all along.
It's
like that, that empowering reminder, the only thing to fear is fear itself.
It's that fear, that belief in the reality of the problem that creates the experience of suffering.
That's a great connection. And DeWaters takes that idea even further and kind of weaves it into her, exploration of our inherent power.
Okay.
She argues that we individualize or bring into our experience as much power and glory as we apprehend and realize.
Are powerful.
It's a really profound concept, suggesting that our experience is a reflection of our understanding.
So the more we align with our true divine nature, the more we're able to express those qualities, not in an egotistical sense, but as a natural emanation of our true selves.
Precisely. And again, she's not talking about a power that, dominates or controls others,
right,
but a power that flows from recognizing our oneness with the divine, that inherent connection to that limitless source of good.
So it's like we're tapping into this infinite reservoir of potential that's always available to us.
Yes.
Now, this is beautiful, but can we really access this power in our everyday lives?
And she emphasizes that this isn't some far-off goal, some future state of enlightenment. It's something that we can access right here, right now.
Okay.
It's about aligning ourselves with that truth in this present moment.
Again, I love how she always brings it back to the present moment.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes that, transformation isn't something that just happens to us. It's an active choice that we make in every moment.
Absolutely. And she reminds us that faith and love are really vital to this process. They're not just, feel-good emotions, but catalysts.
Okay.
Active forces that help us realize our full potential and bridge that gap between the word and the flesh.
So it's about aligning ourselves with those qualities, allowing them to be guiding principles in our lives.
That's a great way to put it. And it's about trusting in that divine guidance, that inner wisdom that's always leading us towards wholeness.
Trust is so key. But it can be challenging to cultivate that trust, especially when we're facing difficult circumstances. How can we hold on to that sense of faith when, life throws us those curveballs?
That's a question, so many of us grapple with.
Right.
And I think DeWaters would say that it starts with recognizing our inherent perfection, even amidst those challenges.
Okay.
It's about holding on to that vision of ourselves as spiritual beings, as expressions of the divine, no matter what our external circumstances might be.
So it's about holding on to that core truth of who we are, that connection to our spiritual essence, even when things get tough.
Exactly. And remembering that those challenges, those illusions, however real they may seem, don't have the power to define us.
They are not the ultimate truth of who we are.
Exactly.
It's a powerful reminder that we are not victims of circumstance, but creators of our experience.
Precisely. And DeWaters encourages us to find practical, tangible ways to express those spiritual truths in our everyday lives, bringing those abstract concepts down to earth, integrating them into our actions and interactions.
So it all comes back to her emphasis on bridging that gap between the spiritual and the material, making those spiritual truths manifest in very concrete ways.
Right.
So if we want to start walking this path, What are some specific steps we can take? How do we move beyond intellectual understanding to actually embodying these truths?
Well, DeWaters offers some very practical suggestions.
Okay.
One of them is to really actively engage with the material. Instead of just passively reading or listening,
Right.
take the time to memorize those key passages,
Okay.
recite them often, really let those truths sink into your consciousness.
So it's like we're feeding our minds with these ideas, nourishing ourselves with that understanding.
Exactly. It's not enough to just have it, floating around up here.
Right, right.
We've got to internalize it.
Yeah, we've got to live it.
And she also emphasizes taking that understanding out into the world.
Okay.
Let it infuse your interactions with others. Let your actions, your very presence, be a reflection of those spiritual truths that you've embraced.
So it's not just about our personal transformation, it's about impacting the world around us, like radiating that light outwards.
Exactly. And she believes that as we do this, as we align ourselves more and more with these spiritual truths, we naturally begin to experience a more harmonious and fulfilling life, not just for ourselves, but for everyone we touch.
So it's like we're creating a ripple effect, Our personal transformation kind of inspires positive change in the world around us.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about recognizing that interconnectedness, that our individual journeys are woven together into this larger tapestry.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into DeWaters' work, I want to circle back to that idea of absolute science and healing. How can we actually apply this concept to the very real challenges that we face in our human lives?
Well, she reminds us that it's not about denying the reality of those challenges,
Yeah.
but about shifting our perspective
Okay.
on how we approach them, recognizing that the power to heal doesn't lie in manipulating those external conditions,
Right.
but in aligning ourselves with that truth of our being.
So it's not about white knuckling our way to health through sheer willpower
Yes,
or
exactly.
Yeah.
It's more about surrendering to that deeper knowing, that inherent wholeness that exists within us, even amidst those challenges.
So this reminds me of that concept of illusion that we were talking about, Like
It's
those experiences of limitation, they don't actually define us. They're not the ultimate truth of who we are.
precisely. They're like those feathers on the woman's arm, a misconception,
Right.
a distortion of perception. And once we see through that illusion, we're free from its grasp. We reclaim that power to heal and create a more harmonious experience for ourselves.
DeWaters' message is so incredibly empowering. It reminds us that we are not victims of circumstance, but active participants in creating our reality.
Absolutely. And she encourages us to not just passively wait for healing to happen, but to actively participate in that process by aligning ourselves with that truth of our being.
So it's about taking ownership of our well-being, recognizing that we have a role to play in our own healing.
Exactly. And it's about trusting in that process, believing that healing is always possible, no matter what the external circumstances might be.
This has been such a rich and fascinating exploration of DeWaters' The Word Made Flesh. As we wrap up this deep dive, is there one key takeaway that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the essence of DeWaters' message is that the Word made flesh is not just a theological concept, but a practical blueprint for living a more fulfilling and harmonious life. It's about bridging that gap between the spiritual and the material, bringing those divine truths into our everyday experience. It's about recognizing that the power to heal, to transform, to create a more loving and just world resides within each of us.
It's a beautiful message of hope and empowerment. As DeWaters put it, this era is about making that truth of being practical, allowing those spiritual principles to guide our lives and to shape our world.
And it all begins with recognizing our true nature,
Yes.
aligning ourselves with those divine qualities that are already present within us, just waiting to be expressed.
Well, if our listeners could walk away with just one thought-provoking question from our deep dive into DeWaters' work, what would it be?
If our bodies are expressions of our consciousness, how might actively cultivating more love, joy, and peace within impact our physical well-being?
That is a wonderful question to ponder. It challenges us to really consider that profound connection between our inner and outer worlds, to explore how our thoughts and feelings shape our physical experience, and to recognize that transformative power of choosing love, joy, and peace as guiding principles in our lives.
It's an invitation to become conscious creators of our reality, to recognize that the power to heal, to transform, and to experience true well-being lies within each of us.
This has been a truly enlightening exploration of DeWaters' work. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we encourage you to continue contemplating these powerful truths and see how they resonate in your own life.
Until next time, keep diving deep.